Good morning, Bill Baer, Dan Holt, and it's our pleasure each SharePoint and Office 365 team to join us for a week of chatting about everything SharePoint and Office 365. Let me get my webcam going here. Bill was a step ahead of me for some reason. There we go. And good morning, Bill. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Bill, do we have your audio?
We should.
Hey, it's very early here in Hawaii. It's not even, or it's just barely 6 o'clock here, so it's fully awake yet. I did down a shot of espresso to try it. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch to the presentation. We've got a lot to talk about this week. For those of you who were with us last week, we had a great introduction to Bill about sort of where SharePoint and Office 365 have come to in their evolution. And today we're going to start talking about specific topics and workloads and use cases that are hot in SharePoint and Office 365, many of which you guys recommended the last episode. So let's switch to the main layout line. We'll begin our discussion here in just a moment. Quick introduction for those of you who are new to Tech Talk with Bill Baer. We do have the open chat right below our videos that you can use to chat with each other, and we'll do our best to follow that chat. But if you've got a question for Bill, please put it in the center module, which is the Questions for Presenter module. That's where we'll queue up the and I'm on wireless here in my hotel, so it'll be a little laggy. I apologize for that. Welcome to Tech Talk with Bill Baer. And Bill, this week I understand we've got the ability to chat with you a little bit about product quality, bugs, and updates. I know that was a hot topic last week. So let's just dive right in. Tell us a little bit about sort of the history of Microsoft's learning about how to keep the product updated.
Thanks, Dan. Your audio cut out, so I'm just going to assume that you're done. And I'll start answering the question.
Looks like we're having.
No worries. So thinking about some of the patching questions that we had last week, particularly down here, I guess over here, in the presenter question area, there was a number of questions around build quality and patching and what we're doing to evolve our strategy there. So I'm going to give you a really long answer to a really short question. So let's first think about what a SharePoint update is composed of. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn around and I'm going to grab something to help visualize what an update is. So looking at this ice cube tray here, you can think of this tray as being an update. And then within an update itself, you have a number of installer packages and you have a number of installers themselves, represented by, let's say these are represented by WSPs or MSPs, sorry about that, and these are lit cubes are MSIs. So basically what you have here is what we call entropy. So entropy in thermodynamic terms is the second law of thermodynamics, basically the number of ways a thermodynamic system can be arranged. So think of each of these QFEs as a thermodynamic system. So basically what we have of patches that can be arranged in a bunch of different ways. So I can take an MSI, and I can take an MSP, and I can begin to move these patches around to a certain extent. So I have a number of fixes. From a fix perspective, that's where the other term comes from that we like to use, which is entropy, kind of the complete or partial wasting away of a body. So where entropy comes from is, you can think of atrophy as kind of the breadth of updates, whereas entropy is the depth of updates. So from a patching perspective, what we tend to see is we have to test across all of these fixes as part of our validation cycle before we ship an update. In the event that one of these is not installed, either because the platform doesn't require it, there's a capability that's not necessary, what you end up with entropy. So now you have a bunch of them that have wasted away. And that's where that term regression comes from. So there's just a number of variables that go into an individual update when it comes to SharePoint. So to kind of continue on that conversation, if you think about what an update's composed of, this is a single MSI. An update today, from a SharePoint perspective, is composed or comprised of 37 MSIs and MSPs. In addition to that, you may find up to 18 additional MSIs and MSPs for each language pack. So you've got 37 base MSIs and MSPs we're talking about, in addition to 18 per language pack. So if you have 10 language packs deployed, you're looking at another 180 updates, or another 180 packages in addition to that update. So what you end up with is you end up with something pretty significant in respect to its footprint, not only on the server, but you can think about from a test pass perspective, there's an opportunity to see those regressions because we're unable to test each variable, or that's, again, the entropy piece of the conversation. So as we think about patching as we move forward, there's two key things we want to reduce. On our side, we want to reduce atrophy. So we want to reduce the number of these untested patches as part of an update. We also want to reduce entropy, which is the sheer number of combinations. So at the end of the day, what you're going to find as a result of the work that we're doing in SharePoint 2016 is we're going to alleviate a lot of that entropy and a lot of that atrophy. So a lot of the depth and a lot of the breadth. And ultimately, what we want to get down to is something that looks more like this. So as you can see now, we have an MSI and we have an MSP. And then if you install a language pack, maybe you end up with another MSI, or maybe another MSP. But ultimately, what we want to do is we want to take that and narrow that scope down from something that looked like a full ice tray to something that looks like a partial ice tray. What that does is, from a test perspective, it reduces the scope and the breadth of our testing, which results in better build quality. And then subsequently, what it does is it also reduces downtime when you deploy updates moving forward in the future. Because now what you're looking at is less service restarts. So if we go back to this ice tray concept and we start adding all of these MSIs and MSPs back into the ice tray, which is representative of what an update looks like today from a SharePoint perspective, what you have is a number of MSIs and MSPs. Each one of these requires some service restart at any given point in time. And that's where you incur a lot of the downtime. Now ultimately, when we begin to reduce this footprint, reduce that surface area, you end up with less service restarts. Subsequently, you end up with less downtime. So now we've addressed kind of two of the three big concerns around updating as we move forward into the next generation of SharePoint. Because we're reducing the number of restarts, service restarts, as a result of deploying patches, which is a byproduct of just reducing the overall number of fixes that are contained within a patch themselves. So now what you've done is you've improved quality and you've reduced downtime, which leads us to kind of the third pillar of what we anticipate doing from a patching perspective, which comes down to footprint. So today you'll download an update, and that update is representative of, anywhere from a gig to 2 gigs. And at the end of the day, when you look at it, many people have told us, well, the update's about the size of SharePoint itself. So as a result of this reduction, what you'll find is the update itself becomes much smaller. So there's a smaller footprint, more rapid deployment, less downtime, and better build quality as a result of some of the work that we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and put the ice tray away, and that's kind of where we're heading from a patching perspective as we move forward. And I think what users of SharePoint 2016 are going to find is that in itself is just going to add a lot of value from a product perspective.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I assume this is the kind of work you're currently, or the kind of approach that's currently being taken in patching the service in Office 365. So this is something that has sort of been honed over the lifespan of SharePoint 2013.
Yeah, so last week we kind of talked about where SharePoint is derived from, and we took a historical look back from a SharePoint perspective. So if you think about the way that we've built SharePoint in the past, we've largely designed it as an on-premises product. We then took that product and made it available from a service perspective. So we brought our on-prem investments to the cloud. And SharePoint 2016 is going to be representative of a different strategy to where we look to the cloud first to figure out what we could do on premises. And we've been running SharePoint in Office 365 for some time now. And really the kind of hallmark moment for us was with SharePoint 2013 when we launched the new Office, or Office 365, back in October of 2012. So as a result of doing so, we began to learn a lot about updating and managing and just some of the operational complexity that comes with running a SharePoint environment at scale. So that's one of those unique components of our own learning that we're able to bring back to our on-premises customers. So kind of that mantra of, we endeavor to bring cloud innovation back to our customers. In many cases, people interpret that as meaning that we endeavor to bring features back to our customers. And indeed, we intend to do so. And there's a number of different ways that we're going to do that. But in this case, there's a lot of IT value and a lot of developer value that comes back to our customers as well. And you're going to find that patching is just one of those experiences that we endeavor to bring back to our customers. And we're going to have a great story about this patching strategy at Ignite. So coming up in just over a month, we're going to be able to share more about what patching looks like in SharePoint 2016, perhaps show you some demonstrations of what it looks like. So it's going to be really cool.
Well, let me ask you some lead questions. Some of these may be ones you can't answer yet, and I'm sure the viewers will understand that. But as you're looking towards solving these problems, one of our attendees actually asked, will there be any improvements on the database schema upgrade side of things? Because obviously that's one of the pain points as well.
Yeah, and that's a great one. I wish I had some other thing to show you to... Actually, I do. So let me go ahead and see if I can do another demo and add some visual aids to this. So just going to reach behind me again and see if I can answer this question. So from a SharePoint perspective, every generation of SharePoint has been something unique. So I just tweeted these out the other day. So here I've got Portal Server 2001, which was a unique SharePoint product, and then we shipped another one, which was SharePoint Portal Server 2003, which was, again, another unique product. The difference between these two guys right here is there's no affinity between them. These were two discrete server products that we deliberately developed as such. Now, if you think about the way that we look at SharePoint moving forward, in Office 365, SharePoint 2013 was kind of the premier build that enabled us to deliver the service. And it ultimately became a service fabric. As we moved forward, we ourselves need to be able to keep our customers up to date from a SharePoint perspective. We always want to have them on the latest and the greatest. So bringing SharePoint 2016 to them, we had to ask ourselves a lot of hard questions. How do we do that? Because in most cases, that would mean upgrading from here to here. And from an upgrade perspective, obviously, there's an opportunity to incur downtime, and everybody knows that from upgrading SharePoint. So ultimately, the way that we think about it is SharePoint 2013 established a great foundation for us to continue this SharePoint journey. So you can almost think of SharePoint 2013 being the genesis block as we move forward from a SharePoint on-prem perspective. So much like Windows long ago had identified a kernel, and that kernel became that thing, that DNA of Windows moving forward, you can imagine SharePoint 2013 becoming the DNA of SharePoint moving forward. Ultimately, what that means is one of the key characteristics of such is we don't want to constantly update database schema much as we have done in the past, because then again, that attributes itself to downtime as well as quality. So, there's always substantial schema differentiation between two particular builds. And a lot of that is by virtue of the different things that we've done with the product. If you think back to SharePoint 2007, we introduced this concept of a shared service provider, which was the evolution of the old profile DB. And then that shared services provider model moved into a service architecture. Now, what we did in 2013 is we kept that shared service architecture that we introduced in SharePoint 2010. So what we found is a foundation. And as we move forward, we're going to continue to find those foundations. SharePoint 2013 as a product is going to be representative of a new foundation or a new baseline for SharePoint moving forward. And because we're going to continue to innovate now on a common kernel, you should see less in respect to just from a schema perspective. So you should see less upgraders working themselves across the schema to completely remodel it on the database side. So absent new capabilities that we're going to deliver, you're going to find a schema that's effectively has some parity between 2013 and the next release.
Well, that's great. Now, and one other real short question for you, because we're going to have to spend some time talking about security and compliance as well. But tell us a little bit about what led to the change in the delivery of updates. Now they're being delivered automatically through Windows Update, especially since we're still being given the Ice Cube tray at this point. That obviously raises people's concerns about being handed a defective Ice Cube in the process. And tell us a little bit about what led to that and what that might bode for the future.
Yeah, I think what we're always trying to do is figure out a way to address updating SharePoint. So we're always looking at ways to make our customers' lives easier. So there's always these exploratory phases to where we try to do something or we endeavor to do something different that we feel will help our customers in the long run. So a couple of weeks ago, perhaps a couple of months ago, we began to deliver patches through the common Windows Update platform. And as we came back, we heard customer feedback. We heard from many of you here on the chat loud and clear that perhaps while the intention was great, it wasn't necessarily helpful. So we kind of went back to our original update strategy, to which we deliver those broad scale cumulative updates, these ice trays back here, through the download center, and then the public updates, the security fixes and such would be a Windows Update deployment. And like I said, moving forward, we're going to completely change the way that you think about doing updates, because we've completely changed the way that we actually do updates. So now from a SharePoint perspective, what you're going to see is completely different orchestration. But like I said, sometimes it's just trial and error. But the good news is if you're going to fail fast. So we moved away from that strategy, but at the same time we do have something great kind of up our sleeves that we'll be able to show you at Ignite, kind of along the lines of what I described through the ice tray, without giving away too many details.
That's excellent. All right. Well, let's spend a few moments talking about our other topic, and I think this is one we'll have to carry over into other weeks, just so that we have some time for the Ask Bill Anything portion of the show. But we had a number of questions come up last week around security and compliance, and we didn't dive heavily into it, but let's hit one or two of the sort of core themes that came out of those questions. One of which was really a cloud question rather than a SharePoint on-prem question related to data sovereignty. People were concerned about what they perceive to be risks of regulatory issues, such as the Patriot Act here in the U.S. They have concerns about perceived and real technical concerns about data sovereignty in certain countries. Tell us a little bit about what's happening at Microsoft related to that.
Yeah, so from a data sovereignty perspective, it's something that we completely understand. And you mentioned a number of different compliance requirements that customers may have. You mentioned the Patriot Act. Obviously, there's a number of other things that you have to take into consideration as related to data sovereignty. And from an on-premises perspective, that's always an easy one to address. You have a data center that's in the locale to which you want to offer your services, so you deploy your product there. From a cloud perspective, what we endeavor to do, and you've probably seen it evolve over the course of time, is if you think back to December, we announced the opening of a data center in Japan. And if you look at more recently, we announced services being offered through Australia. And even more recently, we started to disclose our Express Route for Office 365 offering. So we're always looking at ways that we can address those data sovereignty concerns. In many cases, that may mean a number of different things. That may mean that we localize a data center within a specific locale. You can look at examples like, perhaps like what we did in Japan or what we're doing in Australia. And we're going to continue that effort moving forward to where we can bring data centers closer to our customers, to where data sovereignty no longer becomes, a core issue for them. And then when you pair that with something like ExpressRoute, it just adds that additional layer of security for those customers. So, those recent investments show that we're committed to security and compliance, particularly from those concerns around data sovereignty.
Awesome. And what about from sort of broader security perspectives? We have a question from one of our attendees asking about the banking and finance industry and asking what are the enhancements in security both on the cloud, and let's take that into what you're looking at trying to achieve with SharePoint 2016, at least as much as you can tell us today.
Yeah, I think we're doing a lot from a security and compliance perspective. The Office 365, if you're a cloud user, the Trust Center is a good place to get started with what we're doing from a security and compliance perspective. And then obviously now let's kind of take that conversation to on-prem and start there. So I can't today tell you all of the investments that we're making in SharePoint 2016 as much as I'd like to, and it's hard to not be able to tell you, at least at this point in time. But I can tell you that if you look at what we've done in Office 365, we've done a number of different things. We've made investments across RMS. We've made investments across the infrastructure to enable greater levels of security. We've also done some stuff with like e-discovery. So if you think of classification IDs as part of an e-discovery scenario. So a classification ID is a quick representation of a particular piece of IP stored within Office 365. A great example of a classification ID is something like U.S. Social Security number or credit card number. And basically what the classification ID maps to is an advanced query in order to discover that information. And if you think about the way that we do that is, in many cases from a security perspective, many security products use just simple expressions to discover content. So in the event of a social security number, they may look for 16 characters that are equalized by dashes. And in their eyes, that's representative of a credit card number. The way that we think about it is we like to string together complex predicates to really build a story that corroborates the fact that that information may be a credit card number. So we look beyond just those 16 characters, and we also look for corroborating evidence, such as an expiration ID or a card verification number. So we look for a number of different things to identify sensitive data as it may exist in Office 365. We ship 51 of those out of the box, and then you always have an opportunity to develop your own. So as you think about, the way that we're thinking about SharePoint, the way that we endeavor to evolve it forward, we're going to look as much as possible. It's kind of a three-phased process. Step one for us is to look at the cloud and determine what we can bring back to our on-premises customers as a wholesale proposition. Step two is to determine what can't we bring back wholesale, can we enable that through hybrid, and a great example of which would be the Office Graph. And then step three from a development perspective is identifying those unique things that we can do on premises that perhaps we can't do in the cloud. So from a security perspective, I think you're going to see a lot of great innovation in 2016. The closer we get to May, the more we'll disclose about some of those investments we're making. But I think to the question of banking and finance industry, we completely understand that customers in many cases are constrained, even on-prem, by corporate and regulatory compliance, and they need an advanced set of capabilities to meet those obligations. So it's not something that we've forgotten, and it's something that we are hyper-focused on moving forward.
Right on. Excellent. Well, we're heading towards the end of our show. We want to make sure to have some time for people to ask Bill anything. Let me actually see if I can get my camera up and running here again. I went to a cellular tether. Let's see if this is working a little bit better. Let's go ahead and open up questions. And remember, folks, you can put your questions in the questions for presenter module between Bill and I here and underneath us, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. Yeah. Ibrahim asks about any enhancements on disaster recovery in the cloud.
So from a disaster recovery perspective, that's another area that we work on a lot in Office 365, and most of the details that you can find from what we're doing from a disaster recovery perspective are in the service agreements or the service descriptions that you can find. So there's a number of different things that we're doing. Obviously, the mitigation of downtime is important to us, and patching is just one aspect of the story. Disaster recovery, high availability is the other aspect of the story. So we do a lot of work there in unison with an overall strategy. So the overall strategy is do not incur downtime. And there's a number of different investments that we make there. Patching, and then high availability and disaster recovery. So when we say do not incur downtime, most people just think, okay, high availability, disaster recovery. But we look outside of that and think about, well, what causes downtime? In many cases, DR and HA is something that you have to have, but you rarely ever actually use. Whereas, most people, where they need to think about keeping an environment alive, is you have to think about what's the majority of causes of downtime for me? And what you're going to find is it's not regional outages or the loss of a data center. It's simple stuff like deploying an update, installing a customization. And that's where we first look to mitigate downtime. So we attack that big plate of items that cause downtime, but at the same time, we're committed to our back-end strategy for high availability and disaster recovery. Now, if you're an on-prem customer and you want to use the cloud for a disaster recovery perspective, we just recently did some great documentation on how you can use Azure DR for an on-prem SharePoint environment. So there's a number of different ways that you can split your disaster recovery scenarios across on-prem and the cloud. It looks like
that's an excellent set of yeah, so Kurt asked, will Uber packs go away in SharePoint 2016? And I'm honestly not sure what he means by Uber packs.
Yeah, so if you think about the way our patching strategy, the way that we look to evolve it, you can think about stuff like the Uber as being archaic. And anytime something's archaic, we're going to deprecate it in favor of paving a path forward for more modern and advanced technologies. So, you can imagine, or you may find that we opt to deprecate this idea of Ubers, which is a relatively archaic methodology of delivering updates. And as such, we're going to pave the way for this new, ice cube tray example of doing updates. And it's not really by definition an Uber anymore. This was an Uber, and then, got to go this way. This is, tomorrow. So, you deprecate this in favor of doing something like this. And again, that concept of Uber, this giant thing, is another indication of, where a lot of regression came from, because it was testing across QFEs, and then in the event that only a subset of those were applied or applicable to the target environment, that's where you saw regressions. So.
And I'd like to ask a question that's more on the soft side of updates. What are some of the worst practices you see regarding updates that you wish people would just simply change the way they update?
I think from an update perspective, one of the things that I tend to see is from an update modeling perspective, I tend to see customers who just opt to grab a cumulative update and deploy it. And in many cases, there was nothing in that update that was applicable to their environment. So suppose a cumulative update has a number of fixes in it designed to address performance point or some other capability that they don't even have deployed, that they're not even using. So the necessity of having that update there doesn't exist. So really the first step that I've always told people is evaluate whether or not you even need that cumulative update in your environment by determining if an issue you're having is addressed by that update. If you're not having an issue that update addresses, avoid that update. And really, if you think about what updates are, is updates aren't a methodology to keep you refreshed. They're not intended to be an evergreen scenario. Really what they are is they address specific issues. It's a collection of QFEs that we've shipped that you can deploy. So, my personal preference is that you first evaluate whether or not that update isn't necessary for your environment. If not, you avoid it. And the important thing that you need to think about is the service packs. And that's where I always talk about deployment, is from a service pack perspective, you don't want to skip those. Now, with a service pack, obviously you get all the updates that you may have avoided in the past. But the service pack update is important because it establishes a support baseline. So that's your new baseline moving forward. So Service Pack 1 was a new baseline, which almost resets the clock from a supportability perspective. So you always want to make sure you're on the latest Service Pack. It's much like Windows updates. People install the important updates, great, but at the same time, don't go install every single optional update. Evaluate it first to determine whether or not you need it. So think of it in the case of Windows. Don't look at SharePoint as any different from a technology perspective.
Awesome. Well, and Anthony asked a question that I think is pretty easy to answer, and that is, how will the new patching and update concept allow for catching up after skipping some updates? Will you only be able to catch up in a service pack, or will it be something like today's model where a cumulative update contains all of the previous updates?
So, as we think about, if you think about these updates, to answer Anthony's question, is it's not. From an update perspective today, you can catch up. You can, if you're sitting at the April CU, you can move to the June CU, and that aspect won't change. So it's not like it's not going to be an evergreen scenario where you have to deploy each update as we release them. You can obviously deploy updates later on down the path. So we do have a way of handling that. And like I said, the closer we get to Ignite, and when we get there, that's where you're going to see the whole story on this new patching strategy. I think it's going to be pretty unique for a lot of our customers. I'm looking at some of the questions in the.
Yeah, Trevor's asking, will SharePoint ever take on a feature strategy like Windows has, where certain bits simply don't get installed if you don't need them? So if, for example, you don't want Word automation services, you leave that out of the install, and therefore you never need the patches for that.
So that would be fantastic. It's definitely a great idea. So that kind of comes back to this ice cube tray. So assume patch looked like this, and this represents a feature, a feature, a feature, and a feature. Ultimately, if you don't have this feature installed, your patch, at least in terms of what we do from revving assemblies and et cetera, would only look like this, as opposed to installing everything. And I can't say, this is kind of my CIA answer, since I can't disclose any of that. So I can neither confirm nor deny that that's something that we are thinking about.
But it sounds like you think it's a great idea, and the great minds think alike, huh?
No, I think it's a great idea. I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Awkward silence.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was interrupting you. There's one question that came up in the chat that I think is something I believe I know the answer to, that a lot of people haven't heard, that's fascinating, which is, how, Bill, does Office 365 actually manage its updates? I think there's a perception that I believe is not correct, that when a patch has to get applied to Office 365, they're actually going to the live farms and installing the patches. Is that actually what happens, or does Office 365 use a slightly different strategy to update its own farms?
We have a number of different farms as a component of the service. So, we don't have kind of one live farm that sits there, and that's the only farm that we have, and that's the one that we update. That's kind of the most interesting man in the world scenario. When I do update, I update production. We have, like many customers, a number of different farms for proof of concepts. So kind of, you can think about that as almost first release. So if you enable first release, that's more of like a POC type experience. There's UAT environments, there's dev environments, there's test environments, there's pre-production. There are what we call dog food environments. We have a number of different environments. So a patch, if this is production and this is kind of our dog food environment, it doesn't land up here. It lands here, and then it trickles its way to production after we've thoroughly validated it. Now, to answer the question from a SharePoint context, how do we update SharePoint at scale while minimizing downtime and doing it in a way that's robust and resilient and we don't incur the same regressions, and we don't have the same problems, it's because we've already invested in a strategy like this. And like I said, if you think about updating, it's one of those things we endeavor to bring back to our customers because we've been able to learn a lot. And cloud accrual back to on-prem shouldn't be all about the experiences. It should also be about what we've garnered from our own experience. So now I've used experience twice to describe two different things.
Julia White would both be happy and her head would explode. All right. Let's take one other question, and then we're over our time, so we're going to have to hold off other questions till next week. But Bill, actually, is there a question that you want to pick out of the ones that are sitting in the queue?
Let's see. I'm kind of reading them. Liam just typed like a inordinately long question that I'm trying to read here. Let's see. Aha. So Liam's question is kind of interesting. So the ability to apply a security template that fits the topology, and no surprise coming from Liam, that you would like to build. So you're building a public-facing site. You would apply a specific policy that would only enable, and then you could enable what's needed. You could disable what's not needed. So I think for Liam, we have got an answer for you. It is maybe not in the same way that you describe it, but we do have an answer for the problem that you're describing, or at least the question that you have here. So the good news is we have an answer, probably not in the same way that you're thinking about it, but we have an answer to that same question that we'll be able to share coming in May.
Fantastic. And speaking of May, as well, I'll ask one closing question here, which is any hints you want to give us of anything you're going to be discussing over the next 6 weeks leading up to Ignite?
Yeah, I think as we move into Ignite, obviously we're going to share a little bit more about some of the sessions. There's still some that you haven't seen published. There's still a very unique and interesting hands-on lab that hasn't been published yet. And I believe Mark tweeted about that just the other day. There's one that we're holding close to our chest that we're going to be releasing pretty soon. So if you watch the HOL catalog, this is going to be a very unique one, something we've never done before. It may be applicable to SharePoint, but you'll get an idea as soon as we release that. So you're going to see some news around that coming. You'll probably see us start slowly disclosing at a very high level some of our investment areas from a 2016 perspective. We'll probably start talking about how we think about SharePoint long term. So obviously we talked about the evolution of SharePoint, which was largely applicable to Office 365, and you'll also see us talking more and more about how SharePoint on-prem will be evolving as well. So it's kind of a follow-up from an on-prem perspective. So you may see something like that coming down the road. No guarantees there, but we have a number of different things that we'll start talking about the closer we get to the event. But the one key thing I would point out is keep an eye on the HOL list, because there's going to be a pretty interesting one that you'll find in there that'll make your attendance worthwhile if you're a SharePoint person. And one last question for you.
Very cool. That's a good tease, Bill.
Yep. And I'm just going to answer Igor here in the chat real quick. Yes, they'll be available after the event.
Fantastic. Well, I certainly appreciate you sharing with us two of the what sound like might be very interesting investment areas in the update strategy and in managing security. So we'll look forward to more about that. And for those of you who've been hanging with us today, thank you so much for attending Tech Talk with Bill Baer. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk more topics. Feel free in the chat window or in the Questions for Presenters pod to put in additional questions. We actually evaluate those after the session, and we'll use those to help determine what topics are hot to talk about next time. So until next time, thanks for coming. And Bill, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I know your time is valuable. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan.
Bye, everybody.